Thank you. My name is Hal Sriver, and I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer here at Unravel Data. For those that don't know Unravel Data, we are a data ops and FinOps industry-leading observability platform built for modern data stacks like Snowflake. So in today's conversation, our topic is FinOps best practices, balancing performance and cost for Snowflake. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how organizations are currently trying to maintain a balance between cost and performance. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the gaps, specifically the FinOps teams face, some of the challenges that they get while trying to have a very performant platform on Snowflake, but also be cost effective. Then I'm going to show you a day in the life of how Unravel addresses these challenges to equip FinOps teams and dev teams to get the very best of breed when it comes to performance and cost in Snowflake. So let's actually go into what these teams really care about. And this is the crux of a lot of organizations that we work with today and what they face when trying to balance cost and performance, right? So simply put, FinOps teams care about cost, but more specifically, that would be when maybe budgets are allocated to specific data projects, that they are actually on the right pace to meet them. They also want to be able to have better cost predictability. Nobody wants to get a surprise in the morning when they come into work where they find out, hey, a query ran the night before and cost 6 figures, right? There's countless horror stories like that from that standpoint. This is something that keeps these teams up at night. Now, they also want to make sure that the users of the data products are doing the responsible thing. So things like turning off resources, not being used, or sizing warehouses appropriately for the job or query at hand, ultimately so that these resources that the org is paying for are used efficiently and effectively. So that's what FinOps teams care about. Now let's talk about app teams and what they really care about. And let's be honest here, they care about performance. They're all about making sure that their SLAs are being met, making sure the pipelines that they build are not failing. Nobody likes being woken up in the middle of the night, on those app teams to try to log in and debug failing, jobs or queries because of code, right? What they'll also do is they'll basically size things on what they think they'll get the best performance out of. Things like maybe, auto suspend and resume not necessarily being enabled or used the correct way. Because that developer perhaps who doesn't want to wait for resources based on workload fluctuations, in their pipelines. Or maybe they're choosing a beefier warehouse t-shirt size, right, for their nodes. The more expensive ones in terms of Snowflake credits, because they want to ensure that their jobs or queries are not failing. Or maybe their line of thinking is, hey, let me just bump up this minimum cluster count, right, in auto scaling, because I'm thinking this will cut down or maybe half my query load runtimes. But at the end of the day, are they doing the responsible thing from a cost perspective? Not necessarily. So that's one of the many challenges that FinOps teams face today because of this kind of conundrum, right? Now, some of you on this webinar, maybe you're part of a FinOps team, and a lot of folks that I interact with on those teams come from finance backgrounds, right? Surprise, surprise. Some of them might have technical know-how, but let's face it, that's not the general consensus from that perspective, right? From a FinOps standpoint. So really they lack sometimes the technical knowledge to understand where and how, big inefficiencies are, where do those lie, to know, the what's, the how's, the where's of those technical inefficiencies. So a lot of times when the FinOps teams get a bill at the end of the month, they see a huge spike in cost, they'll go to those app developer teams that use the data platforms like Snowflake, and they'll end up hearing excuses, right? They'll hear things like, hey, that's an executive dashboard. And if that doesn't meet, particular SLAs, everybody's in trouble. Or, I've got these data pipelines where if they don't meet the needs of, delivering to our end user customers the data they need or are expecting, we get fined if that data is not ready. All justified excuses or really reasons, I'd say, but it also explains why they would be choosing performance over cost. But the FinOps teams, these guys, they're running blind. How are they able to fact check that, right? That the app dev teams are doing the responsible things, but also making sure, they're not negatively affecting performance. So being able to do that fact checking that's a challenge for FinOps teams. Now let's say, hey, there's some obvious things happening. Maybe a pipeline was brought in from a legacy standpoint. They know that there are some baked in inefficiencies inside of it, but maybe also there was a round of layoffs recently, or there were teams that were asked to take on more responsibility. So maybe now the time they want to spend is on revenue generating projects because, that's how they're incentivized to do that. They don't really wish to go back and maybe find code inefficiencies in legacy pipelines, right? And so a lot of struggles organizations face is when they try to do some sort of optimization initiatives. The fact around that is that nobody has time for this. And even if they did, there's no guarantee they'll find enough inefficiencies, for us to actually make an impact to the bottom line. Unfortunately, what this leads to is organizations end up doing nothing. So the risk of between, having the time to find where these inefficiencies lie, in their minds outweigh the risk of maybe, finding some of those inefficiencies and netting out some sort of, minimal savings. And so you see a lot of organizations get kind of bottlenecked on this because the perceived amount of time it would take to do really that end-to-end analysis, which is what's needed, of where those inefficiencies are across the organization is prohibitive. Last but not least on this list, so with all this not being in place, the challenge for FinOps teams is actually setting up some sort of governance or guardrails to enforce responsible usage. So taking into account all of the points I just talked about above, I know the teams really want to do well with these very powerful data platforms, but honestly, and in my experience, they don't always understand where these inefficiencies are. They don't understand the impact of what they can actually unlock if they were to address these inefficiencies. And without those insights, how can you actually enforce accountability, to those end users, to those app teams, that they're actually doing the responsible things and maybe even doing a what's called a shift left mentality. Those things go to the wayside, if FinOps teams are not equipped with these types of insights. Now, what if I were to tell you that there was a tool that made it easy for developers to not only maximize their jobs, their queries from a performance standpoint, but also for cost. But this tool could also give all those insights to the FinOps team so that they could do their job and actually sleep soundly at night. Well, that's where Unravel comes in. And so what I am going to do is shift over here to my trusty demo playground. Okay, so here you are looking at the Unravel user interface for Snowflake. And, I'm on this screen, this home screen dashboard, and there's a wealth of information here. And if you've been following the webinar series, we've covered off on a lot of the value here. So I encourage you to go back and rewatch some of those. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to scroll down to this insight analysis section here. And what I'm focusing on is this kind of queries subsection. And so what you're seeing here are queries with insights around inefficiencies. And really, these are opportunities for improvement on their performance and cost efficiency, right? Those are those opportunities. And some of these queries may be tied to pipelines that feed a dashboard for some executive or some other critical application or something otherwise like that. So what I'd like to do here is I'm going to drill down into one of these high impact areas over here. I'm going to choose the join inefficiency kind of sub area. This is a common one. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of filtering here, get myself set up. Now what all this has done really is it's taken us from the Home tab over here to this Queries tab. And this is a good view for a lot of different teams. But what I'm going to do is put on my developer hat here. And what this is providing is for the selected account, the selected warehouses. There's actually a lot of good filters that can be used here on the left side to find not only what I'll call impedances and bottlenecks and other code level inefficiencies, but you can also filter, if I come down here a little bit, based on cost, duration, and time. Anyway, as I said a moment ago, I'm looking at this through the lens of that developer. And when I started off my conversation in this webinar, I had said that, hey, application teams care about performance, not necessarily things like over-provisioning per se, as that's more of a cost optimization exercise. But what we're seeing here on this page is every line is it's a query, right? It may be part of that larger pipeline. Maybe it's driven through some sort of scheduling mechanism or something, but here they are. I got it filtered by cost in a descending order. But then also we are filtering by the specific insight type of avoiding cross joins. And this is being part of that category of join inefficiencies from that high impact section from the previous screen. And by the way, there's a lot of different insights that Unravel's purpose-built AI is screening for. Maybe some of them are bottleneck related or unintentional, sometimes ways that code was written, right, that slows down the query or creates an overabundance of data I/O that needs to be returned, things that are costly, like what we've filtered for here on the left, right? Other things around best practices, right, like avoiding a select star in some cases, right, or maybe the use of an inner join without specific clauses, or even usage of functions and predicates, right, which might be slowing down your queries. So there's a lot of other good information here: warehouse name, duration, start time, end time, who the user is, again, that cost, right? So getting back to the crux of the subject here and reminding you, I have my dev hat on, right? I have my developer hat on. So I've either come into this UI view because maybe I got an alert of some sort with a link, right? Email or Slack or Teams or something like that. Maybe I navigated just like we did from that homepage down through into this filtered view, right, of these queries. And for argument's sake, let's say I'm this user, Viswa, at the top here, and maybe I didn't even know I had a query out there that had, some inefficiencies in it. So let me see what Unravel has to say. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click and drill down into this particular query at the top here. Okay, so now what you're seeing here is this is where Unravel's purpose-built AI comes in. First of all, Unravel has proactively identified that there is indeed an inefficiency in the first place, right? We saw that on the previous screen. That's why we got alerted. That's why we clicked in and started to dig into what's going on here. And now, actually, Unravel is going to take this a step further. And in that, it's doing a full end-to-end analysis, and it's going to say, so, hey, here's the problem, right? There's some join inefficiency going on, right? And actually, if I expand this, there's two of them. One is related to cross joins, and another is related to usage of functions in a predicate. We actually just mentioned this a moment ago. And so as I expand these a little bit further, scroll down to make that easier for everybody to see. So as we expanded these, Unravel is actually giving you what I'll call a problem statement. Unravel is doing the analysis for you. So for this cross join, right, it's telling you where, first of all, line 47, right, we can go up into the code and we can go see that line, wherever line 47 is. Okay, here's our cross join, right? So it's telling us where, it's telling us between which two tables I am making that join, right? It's giving us that information here as well. And as we know, what do we know about that from a best practices standpoint, right? We know that this could create what's called a Cartesian product. So for some of you non-necessarily technical folks on the call, this is where a cross join returns all of the rows listed in a query, so that each row in a table, like the first table, is paired with each row in table 2, and so on. And this creates this explosion of data. And what we can see here, let me scroll to the top just to illustrate that. So between those two tables, we only scanned, a few megs of data, a couple hundred, but bytes written is 1.2 gigs, and it affects something around 79 million rows. So this is costly from a performance standpoint, but also in dollars, right? I've seen it where this number here is much larger, in the trillions of affected rows, to where these bytes are actually written, were trying to be written to the local disk, right? And it couldn't all fit. It actually spilled to external disk. Without getting too deep here, technically, right, that dynamic external disk, extra disk, the cost of that can be unnecessarily high. Anyway, Unravel takes that analysis and then provides a clear alternative consideration, if you will. And in this case, that's, hey, consider using an inner join instead. Now, just to touch on the second guy down here, the second join inefficiency around the usage of functions. This guy is providing the problem statement where specifically in the SQL lines of code, here, 66 and 67, we can scroll down a little bit, find those. Let's see here. All right. What it's saying is, when you're using the date functions, this can significantly slow down your query. Again, this fits nicely into our app team or dev team's kind of use case around caring mostly about performance, right? The nice thing about this is because we're now responsibly writing code, not only does this have a positive effect on the performance, which those teams care about, but also on the cost in a dollars and cents manner, right, which the FinOps teams care about. So if we take a step back for a second, without the insight into why the query is not performing as expected or needed, and really without that time to investigate because whatever lack of resources or maybe even the technical maturity of the team just isn't there yet, the developer here might look at this as a problem with maybe the cluster or the nodes, and pick that larger t-shirt size or ramp up that minimum count in the cluster from an auto scaling perspective, right? Which in the end might marginally improve performance, but ends up costing more and doesn't fit into the notion of or the model of using these highly capable data platforms responsibly. So here with Unravel, the problem statements are very clear to the app team, to that developer. And here's some remediation steps or direction to take to remediate. Now, let me bring this back around to what the FinOps teams care about. And what is that? Cost, right? Talked about that a few moments ago. Now, at the top of this query detail page is the cost for this run, right? Approximately 24 bucks. There's also the Snowflake credit equivalent down there as well. As I mentioned earlier, this could be part of a larger pipeline or scheduled in some fashion, to run, I don't know, multiple times a day, week, whatever. The point is, here's its cost. And if we back out from here, keeping this in mind, I want to go back to the home page. Back to our queries here. And again, focusing on the query insight analysis piece here. I'm going to switch hats here. I'm going to put down my developer hat, and now I'm going to put on my FinOps hat. So we see here that this section talks about things like impact, we talked about, right? But untapped savings. It shows here not only in an annualized savings of dollars and cents, but also a percentage of how much faster these queries, again, in these high impact categories, like the one we just dove into, would run were the recommended changes implemented. And just to further talk through this, this untapped savings, if I'm the FinOps person, this is what I care about. This is what I'm going to gravitate towards when I'm in this dashboard, because essentially what this represents is the cost of doing nothing at all. So I'm going to let that sink in for a second for all you finance folks in the audience. And while you're pondering that, I'm going to slide over here to, right now we're focused on this queries kind of subsection. I'm going to slide over here to this operations tab. So now at this point, the conversation becomes a question of, okay, hey, we have this cool tool, Unravel. It's doing all the hard work for us in terms of surfacing those high impact, insights with recommendations to remediate inefficiencies found in my, my app team's code. And now as the FinOps person, how do I realistically keep track of and actually hold folks accountable? So, well, there's logic built in here to Unravel to do just that. And just a quick anecdotal story about this. We have a large organization, customer, a logistics organization. They had a slew of new developers come in. This was back during like the peak of COVID. So they ramped up a lot. Everybody was ordering things online, right? A lot of shipping, logistics needed, so on and so forth. The challenge was they had this shiny new tool, this new Snowflake technology. They didn't necessarily understand all of the intricacies in terms of responsible behavior when it comes to powerful technologies like this. And so they had a massive cost overrun. Now, what they did to address the impact of implementing some of the inefficiencies that were spoon-fed to them by Unravel, they used this, if you take a look down here in the lower right, they used this kind of top 5 as kind of a wall of fame. So these were the folks, the developers, who were really unlocking the most savings at the organization. And so what it really did was it ended up being sort of gamified, right? the savings part, that is. And the way it worked, like here, is my environment is tied to GitHub. The tracker piece here is related to pull requests with Unravel insights attached to them that were resolved and then merged. And so you can see over here the results of that, right? The top 5 devs in that case who had the most resolved merged PRs. More importantly, it gave visibility to the folks, who were really responsible for driving costs through these savings. And what it did in this particular example was they incentivized being part of this, wall of fame, monetary incentives, that is. But really what it ended up doing was helping drive accountability to those application teams. And you'll hear a lot of people talking about this shift left mentality, which, it can mean a lot of things, but, shift left mentality for a lot of organizations is, hey, let's fix this problem at the code level. Whether that problem is inefficiencies that are impacting performance or, driving cost overruns, whatever it is, let's address it during the code. And then when it's introduced to those higher environments, you have this positive downstream effect, right? Actually fixing things before they make it into some maybe your more critical workloads. And that's where we can really start to drive this shift left mentality that a lot of organizations are talking about and adopting. So actually what I'll do now is I'm gonna just jump over here to this cost tab and this kind of queries sub-tab. So here, let me make it a little bit bigger. All right, it's just some simple trending in my very small demo environment, but I've seen customers use this to entice that proper behavior with, some enforcement. So things like, hey, maybe, we want to have a chargeback model. Things like that model including or taking into account the inefficiencies detected by Unravel. And by the way, all you have to do is have your end users actually use Unravel to actualize the inefficiencies, right? To correct those. That's been really, really helpful to folks that need to report to those C-suites, right? The CEOs, the CFOs, giving them the ammunition to actually have those tough conversations, especially with a very technical tool like Snowflake, and saying, hey, with confidence, there's inefficiencies here. I'm actually quantifying it now, and now I'm holding you accountable for it. Now that's some powerful stuff. And that's how we empower FinOps teams and organizations to have a good understanding of where cost is trending and have a better understanding of if we actualize some of these inefficiencies and optimizations, we can actually bring costs into a more linear instead of an exponential growth. This ends up paying dividends to those folks who have things like an upcoming renewal and they just want to size things appropriately, maybe based on current usage and where those inefficiencies are. So today we covered a few things, right? One, we covered the challenges of balancing cost and performance, in the context of those different personas that we talked about. We also went over how all of this really impacts the FinOps teams mostly, right? Because they really are handicapped from a technical perspective a lot of the time. And, we also are making it really easy to quantify where these inefficiencies are, really help push, accountability in the organization as well. And then ultimately, getting the best of both worlds, right? Making sure not only do you have a performance stack, but having that without those cost overruns. Okay, so just checking into time here. I know we got a couple questions. First question, how can I predict my Snowflake platform costs and create more accurate budgets? So actually, I'll answer that with what we're already looking at on the screen here, with some of these cost explorer trends. And the same, I know we focused mostly on queries and code level trending and so forth, but we also have these same trends around the warehouses themselves, the users as well, and then from an overarching overview perspective of the entire environment. But focusing back here to answer the question, really what we want to do at the end of the day is provide better cost predictability. Looking at this now, it's not really a good chart to show, kind of an exponential cost trajectory, but let's just pretend that's what we're seeing here, something that's more exponential in consumption. So as a FinOps organization, we really want that predictability, right? So with the understanding of where the untapped savings is, like back here, right, in our home screen, here's all this untapped savings. Again, small environment, but 20K annualized. This is where all of that untapped savings is. These are the opportunities, right? Those focus areas in terms of the code inequalities. We can really start to not only take those graphs and start to flatten that trend in a more linear, progressive fashion, but we can also start to more accurately set our budgets. And by the way, all while holding folks accountable, right? Okay, last question. Hey, what is a cost cleanse day? And how can I advocate for or implement something similar? So we had an organization, I don't know that they called it cost cleanse day. It was maybe named something else. But they dedicated a day or a few days to optimizing and trying to identify themselves where some of the cost drivers are, implement some change to save the organization some money. The reason why they did this on specific days is they wanted to have their app teams involved, right, to take those days. But, let's be real, right? Companies are in the business of generating revenue. However, it's a great way for organizations to shed some light on the fact that this is, an important enough issue to actually take some and dedicate a few days out of the year for cost cleansing. So I guess what it does first is it provides visibility, right? Hey, there are things that are inefficient out there, right? And they are costing us some unneeded spend, right? So let's identify what those are and save some costs for the business. Just, black and white, plain and simple. But what it also ended up doing was bringing to light things like maybe a developer that was just doing things that were cost prohibitive. And so taking a step back and, again, shining that light on those things, actually that one netted out a cost savings for the company, but also made them say, hey, I should probably fix this moving forward. And that ended up having a downstream effect, right? The company actually started seeing fewer and fewer issues. They knew to not, do some of the same things over and over in their code because they saw from Unravel some of the inefficiencies that were identified. So that's probably a good example of a cleansing day. It's a good way to start at least. But really a longer sustaining way is to push better behavior through governance, whether that's through our wall of fame here or wall of shame for that matter, right? Whatever it might be. First of all, you need the insights and the efficiency recommendations to quantify it in the first place, and that's really where Unravel comes into play and can do for you. Okay, I don't see any more questions here, but I know I flashed my last slide here earlier. I'll go back to it. Before we break, I'll just share this one last thing. If you think the things that I've been sharing with you today and throughout the webinar series can help you, you can go today and you can get a free Snowflake health check from us simply by visiting this URL here, unrivaledata.com/databricks. Sorry, that's wrong slide. That's supposed to be Snowflake. Snowflake-health-check-request. So go ahead, check that out. It's free to you. Absolutely no cost to you to do this. I definitely recommend you try out the product, see what life could be like if you're using Unravel for your data ops and FinOps observability use cases. So thanks again for joining. My name's Hal Sriver, and we'll see you on the next one.